Hello and welcome to the Tabletop Tactics Podcast, the show where each week we discuss a different tale, topic or tangent and hear from you, our amazing community. I am James Jordan, aka The Bard, and today I am joined by Mr. Joe Pointing.
Hello.
Mr. Kelso Beard.
Hello.
And a very special guest, Mr. Tom Barry. How are we doing today, gentlemen?
Splendid. I'm afraid I have no interesting anecdotes, which I realised, or a joke, which I realised as you were doing the intro.
Well, I think we should just pack up and leave.
Terribly sorry.
I've ruined it immediately.
I said specifically in the last episode, I'll do it every time.
Yeah, it's not. You're already breaking promises. That's very sad. But to not just completely scare Tom away immediately, let's actually introduce our guest. So yeah, Tom, obviously we know who you are. That's why we've invited you on. But why don't you talk about, just for a second, introduce yourself to us and the audience so they know who you are.
But there's, I guess, a few ways you could refer to what I do, but basically I'm a psychologist. The more complicated way to describe me is that I'm an experimental psychopathologist. That means lots of things and nothing, or that I'm a mental health scientist, but basically I'm a professor at the University of Bath.
Amazing.
The extended title sounds very 40K.
Experimental psychopathology.
Yeah, it sounds like a
cool.
James Steele cult character or something. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's really, really cool.
We're already merging worlds together, isn't it?
Let's go. Is that we planned it? So to sort of frame today's episode, we did a video a couple of years ago on a similar topic. Actually, why don't you do this bit, because obviously you filmed that video with Katie, and I think that sort of is the framing for why we wanted to do this video. But yeah, why don't you talk us through what the previous video was and what we sort of tried to achieve with that?
Well, yeah, we filmed that, it was 2 years ago now, Kate and I did that, because at the time that this video gets released, we should be either on or either side of World Mental Health Awareness Day, I think is the full title. So the previous video that we did was just to sort of talk about it openly. I think within the community, it's a topic that is certainly of interest, can affect lots of different people, but not necessarily talked about to a high level. So we wanted to sort of discuss it between me and Katie, talk about our own experiences, and also sort of bring in the hobby and how that's helped us with our own mental health and things like that. So we were keen to do another one for this year, because it's a topic that is quite close to my heart. And rather than do a similar sort of thing again, I thought it'd be great to get you on, Tom.
A referee.
A referee, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh,
Referee.
get the tables and the chairs. And sort of get a more scientific opinion to level up the conversation a little bit, rather than...
A lot of pressure in that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I thought I'd take it off my shoulders and just put it on yours.
Yeah, because I think anecdotally, certainly, all of the team here often talk about how we find painting, say, very therapeutic, because it's sort of some quiet time you can focus on something physical, and playing with your friends when you do play like sort of your D&D or Warhammer is quite a nice social and communicative experience. And anecdotally, I think we all have found that that's been really helpful for our mental health. But I think we're very interested to know, as a professional in the field, if there is sort of more reasons as to why that might be, and sort of if there's any science behind that of why actually doing something like that does make you feel good or does help in that regard, to a certain extent, of course.
I think that we don't necessarily need to make a distinction between this being a hobby and everything else we might do. And I appreciate for you guys that line is really blurred anyway. But I think that these are just the things that humans do to fill their time.
Yeah.
And I think we can talk a lot about how the time that's spent in this hobby has its benefits. I think, and I say this looking at it from the outside. I'm not too involved in this community myself, and particularly now. And I was perhaps more involved when I was younger. But one of the really interesting things about this hobby, if you like, looking at it from the outside, is how diverse it is, how many ways one can enjoy or express themselves whilst doing this, versus other things which are in many ways much more unitary. There is maybe one or two things that you get from it, whereas I think, looking at this hobby from the outside, if you were to ask anybody, ask you two, ask the guys outside, ask listeners, viewers, I'm sure everybody gets something different from it. or get something different from it at different times in their life. You know, they indulge in different parts of the activity at different times. And so I think what it is you're getting from it is going to differ based on which part of the hobby you're enjoying at a given time, what else is going on in your life. You know, it correct me if I'm wrong, it seems really, really diverse. There's a lot of things that people get from it, and it's not the case that everybody gets the same thing from it. You know, if you contrast that with running, for example, if you ask a runner or ask a group of runners what it is they get from that activity, for the most part, people will say, you know, enjoy pushing myself, enjoy the burst afterwards of positive hormones, enjoy feeling fit.
Yes.
And you know, maybe running with another person. But there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to break it down into the constituent parts to try and be scientific about this.
Well, that's really fascinating, actually, because when you mentioned that thing about running, of that pushing yourself and sort of constantly wanting to improve, that strikes me as something that very much, for say competitive players or people that paint, it might be they do almost their reps of wanting to improve, and maybe that is a similar kind of, that's what they're getting out of it. But as you say, it is such a diverse hobby. There's so many different elements you can take from each, if it's a social thing or a personal improvement sort of thing you want to achieve. And I think I've never really looked at it in that way, which is really interesting.
Well, it's different for everyone, isn't it? Because you've got, I think there's a very, very large community of people that do painting and modelling and things like that. There's the groups that enjoy gaming, both competitively and otherwise. So there's match plays the competitive way, and then you've just got like a normal game that you play. Exactly, with your mates at home. There's hundreds of novels that go with the hobby as well. So
some people who don't even paint or play but enjoy the lore.
Just books.
Yeah.
Very, very deep lore you can get lost in. Those tend to be like the main parts. I think more recently it's now sort of moving into like animation and TV shows and things like that. But generally speaking, it's always been sort of like tabletop, hobby, books, that sort of thing.
It's quite unique, it seems, in that for a certain section of the community, I'm sure what they're getting from it is almost entirely social, is that community element, being able to play with other people. I'm sure for another section of the community, it's being able to isolate yourself. Maybe because that's just how you enjoy, living your life, or maybe because, your life outside of the hobby is incredibly busy and, talking to people all the time. And maybe perhaps this is something that you guys have seen as your enjoyment of the game and your expression of it has become very social now, I guess is one way to express, how this job manifests. Perhaps you've come to enjoy the more isolated and individual parts of it more and get something from that in terms of your mental health that perhaps before this became, this, that maybe you didn't enjoy it as much. Maybe that back then it was something more just the social element.
Yeah, I think that's actually really interesting, because I've never really thought about the fact of that since I've sort of started here. I don't think I've played outside of here since, in a way, and I have sort of now really leaned into what is referred to as the hobby side, the painting kind of thing, because if we are sort of almost like always on or talking, being quite social, I really like the quiet me time, so to speak, to just almost put my brain on ice and just be like, cool, I'm gonna paint this guy. And I find that like a really calming and therapeutic experience for me, at least. But yeah, I'm not sure if you find a similar thing.
Well, interestingly, when I've described sometimes as like working here, I kind of lost my hobby in some ways, because I was so involved with it previously in terms of like painting and things like that. I do so much of it at work that I don't do as much of it at home anymore. So I wonder if that's had an interesting, it's done something to the balance potentially. But what is great is that I get to do it at work. So I kind of get bonus points there.
And so then, whereas before perhaps what you got from it in terms of your mental health was a smaller fraction of your life because you could only enjoy it, outside of work hours. Now that it presumably has become the majority of your day, you're able to, take advantage of those benefits for a longer period of time. and also in the absence of any stress or negativity that would have come from past work that now doesn't exist for you. Though I'm sure there are stresses in this career as well, as there are in all.
Yeah.
But
none at all. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. Like you were saying that. I think maybe it is like I don't think I did hobby anywhere near as much as I used to, because almost it is that the downtime you almost do other things, if that makes sense, and because
you miss it.
I certainly do. I think I'm a very busy boy at the moment because I'm planning a wedding at the same time. So I think I've just got no time. But then that's why I think I enjoy when I can get those moments, because it slows everything down for me. Yeah. And same with I've been a big fan of video games and things like that give you a little bit of kind of focus on something, but that is calming enough to sort of let your brain wander, if that makes sense.
And I think there's something to that. If you're not able to enjoy or indulge in an activity all of the time, I think those acute bursts of the activity are far more intense, both in terms of how you spend your time, but also the enjoyment you get from it.
Yeah.
Simply because you appreciate it more, because its contrast to the rest of your time is much greater. If you were spending 90% of your time doing the hobby and 10% of your time something else, the contrast would be less strong.
Yes.
But you really treasure those moments, and then the mental health benefits of it are perhaps a bit stronger. And I expect that there is some sort of curve to that. So there's probably a perfect balance one could strike between enjoying one's hobby and enjoying other hobbies and other activities that exist in your life that allow you to extract the maximum benefit out of every activity. And I think that there's a lot these days said about optimization and everybody breathing through their nose and things, and and doing all these kinds of things to just maximize positive feeling and stuff like that. That I think you can very easily fall in the trap of thinking that everything you do needs to have a planned and very obvious effect on your mental health. That every hour of the day must be spent to your benefit, and that anything other than this is going to have world-shattering effects on your well-being. and I think this outlook on life is itself unhelpful. That you need to maximize time, but I think it can be helpful to try and strike the right balance so that you can maintain enjoyment out of things. Because I think even if it's something you enjoy, trying to enjoy it in a sustainable way, I think is the most important thing. And that going back to that balance between an activity that is social versus one that is more individual, more independent. I think about times when I've enjoyed doing things that are isolated. I'm a professor. I enjoy being on my own. That's the essentially the premise of my job. But of course, occasionally I have to go out and speak to large numbers of people. And I think it's very, very, very easy for me, and particularly when I was younger, to recognize the benefit, the enjoyment that I get from sitting in my bedroom playing computer games and not doing a tremendous amount of social activity with other people. And really indulge myself in that, thinking I absolutely love this, and it feels fantastic. And games are constructed such that I feel fantastic throughout the life that I'm playing it. But I know that if I do that too much, I'm losing the other bits of life that it becomes unsustainable. It's and you've got to resist that enjoyment. To take those other benefits from other parts of life. At least for me, I would never tell anybody what to do. But
of course,
for me, that's recognizing how to enjoy things sustainably has been very important.
I think that's a really good point. I think with all things, like balance is always great. If you don't want to do too much of anything, but it is especially I think often I've found, and I think this is something I spoke about a lot on the painting side of things, in creating a whole army for a Warhammer thing. You might want to do this project, you want to paint all these things, and it might be enjoyable to start with, But then there's this thing of you can quite easily kind of burn yourself out on it because you feel compelled to, I have to paint this whole army. And something that kind of pressure you put on yourself can suddenly turn a really enjoyable, I'm just going to have fun, into, I'm almost stressing about my fun time because it's like, why aren't I enjoying this?
I think anyone in the audience can probably take something from the hobby burnout phrase. Like a lot of the time you sort of see someone that maybe has like you say, started a project, got really into it, and then they've just sort of hit some kind of wall with it and then lost all momentum. That's something that describes a fair bit as hobby burnout on if someone's like journaling their project on Instagram or whatever, it might suddenly come to a halt because of hobby burnout.
And the thing is that it's possible, or all of the things that make it possible to burn out are also the things that presumably make it enjoyable. That there is, an objective that you have that is within your control, and that it is something that it's not easy to obtain but requires effort. But of course, the planning to do all of that stuff might exist such that the goal is too far advanced, and it's hard to anticipate that in advance, I think. And I don't have advice on that because I've never done it. And actually, we've talked before about how one of the reason why I never really got involved in the hobby side of this, despite the fact sort of the circles within the Venn diagram of interests within our life are all overlapping, but the fact that I never got involved in this was purely because I always thought that the painting side of this would be too stressful for me, because I have been so terrible at art my entire life, and I'm not at all precise, and I don't know that I would get any enjoyment from it beyond simply just being stressed out at how I was never able to make it as good as I wanted it to be. Like I'm sure if I were to think about it, I could imagine how it would look. It would look like this stuff, and in my mind I'd be like, well, I'll just put the hand on the thing and it will look like this. And then as I'm doing it, it looks like when they rip, what did they? They restored the painting in the church. That's how it would look. It would always look like that.
Or when like Homer builds his own barbecue, he's like, why doesn't mine look like that?
Exactly. And growing up, I didn't realize that it was possible to participate in this without having to do the painting, because I didn't know enough people who did it for somebody to say, don't worry about it. That's only one side of it. So I just thought I was too crap to do it.
I think that again. I think you're just saying very many good things. I keep saying that's a really good point. I've said that after everything, but it's true. There is a real element of, certainly when I was getting into the hobby, I think thankfully it is starting to change now with the advent of people sharing their work on social media. It is certainly a move to everyone can share their work. So you see far more of a cross-section of what people have achieved, as opposed to initially, if you're comparing yourself to the box art, which is of a certain caliber, and then you're like, oh man, I can't quite achieve that. I think it sometimes almost takes away from your own achievement of, well, I've done something that I'm quite proud of, but you felt like you couldn't almost be because it should look like something else.
That to me says something about how healthy this community is, if that's the case, because I would have expected that, as with a lot of other areas of life, and I think about like fitness and things like that, all social media has done is amplify the perfect, and amplify the very worst of things, But if it's the case that, people are being reinforced for their work, irrespective of how perfect it is, and that people are feeling comfortable sharing it and getting that reinforcement, then, it sounds like this is some kind of online utopia. Is that how it feels? Or?
It's generally it tends to be quite a positive place to be, especially for the painting community. You tend to see lots of, you very, very rarely, although I certainly haven't really so much this tour, someone saying, that doesn't look very good. Well, I would have done it that way. Like, it tends to be like, good job, that's nice. I like that, that's great. It's quite a healthy corner of social media, I think. There's certainly on other platforms, I think some channels that we see tend to focus very much on the negative to sort of get the attention and get a shock factor. But certainly in terms of like the hobbying, painting, modeling customization community, that tends to be a pretty positive place, I think.
Yeah,
which is nice.
And I think, like you say, it is rare, seemingly, to have that kind of positive reinforcement in places on social media. But yeah, I would agree, the hobby side, certainly. I don't know necessarily why that is, but I think maybe it is because it is quite a difficult thing to do. And I think everyone is almost helping be like, oh, cool, like you've realised something I didn't realise you could do. So it's quite a lot of sharing of ideas, and it feels very it feels like a community, the paying side, certainly.
No one starts good.
No
one's just like, perfect.
Yeah.
A space marine is complete. I did it.
Magnum opus.
It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So I think everyone knows like what you have to do to get to a certain level, or whatever level you wanted to get to.
Sure.
It's, I think there's lots of steps to wherever you want to get to, and you tend to get help along the way. It's nice.
Does it in general? It's such a cliche, and I feel a bit cringe with the words leaving my mouth. But does it feel that this community is a sort of safe space where, not just in terms of expressing yourself within the game, but where you can feel comfortable sort of being yourself and talking about about your mental health as you did 2 years ago very bravely?
For the most part, I think. There's definitely, traditionally, I don't think I'm speaking out of turns here, the Warhammer community traditionally has been very white male. Yeah. Traditionally, that's kind of how it's been. It's definitely becoming more diverse, from what I've seen anyway. And I think, unfortunately, tends to be some times where you might see someone who has shared like an unpleasant experience, which happens sometimes, but more often than not, the support that comes to counteract that negativity is overwhelmingly massive.
Yes.
So there are times where it doesn't go how everyone would hope it would go,
of course.
But generally speaking, the positives massively outweigh the negatives. It's a very niche thing, Warhammer. So I think when people do get the enjoyment of it, they want to bring people along with it. Yeah. And I think any of the gatekeepers, as they're referred to sometimes, I think that sort of thing is sort of getting pushed to one side a little bit more, and it's becoming far more open for everyone to enjoy. Because if people aren't getting involved with the hobby, it's going to die. Yeah. For a niche hobby, like it relies on people sort of coming together and enjoying it together and like bringing people up together. So that's a very important thing, and I think because it's so important to so many people for all sorts of reasons, it tends to be a far more positive space.
I have so many questions. It's so interesting to me. Do you get this? Do you mind if I ask a lot of questions?
Go.
Do you then get the sense that part of that community is built on a sense that it is different and marginal, and that it is not mainstream, or is there a sense that once within it, because I know that it is a massive community, that actually it feels mainstream when you're inside of it because there's just so many people involved in it, or does some of the camaraderie and support that you find within this community come from a sense of, everybody sort of understands that we've come from all sorts of walks of life, and we're all here for sort of a common purpose, a common enjoyment that maybe is not so well understood by sort of normies outside, or whatever you want to call them.
I think, and it's funny because they're quite the Venn diagram of people that are into both things. I think is almost the same crowd, but I think it really reminds me of when you go to like a metal festival, and it's a huge genre. Yeah. It's like, despite it being perceived,
I think it is the largest.
Yeah, ironically, it's perceived as this sort of outsider thing.
Yeah.
Whereas actually now, I think, especially with things like Stranger Things coming out and sort of putting the spotlight on D&D, it's sort of become, you've got like David Arbor and Henry Cavill and these like popular figures now getting in publicly saying they're into Warhammer. It sort of reignited that people have come out of the woodwork being like, actually, I love the hobby too. Yeah. And I think in the same way that often happens with like niche music genres, is they're very passionate fan bases that then when you are all together as a community, you do want to enjoy it as a community and support others that are into it, because you're almost coming together with, I'm into this thing too. Yeah. Especially because compared to, say, football, it obviously is niche, but it is, like you say, it's a huge, vast community that I think can sometimes, when you're in it, people almost have like an idea of what the mainstream of the hobby is. But it is like, but that's the best example I can think at like a metal festival or something. Like you're all in it together, so you want to protect it or look after each other because you know the road that kind of got you into it in that sense.
Is there a sense that since D&D, Warhammer and stuff, since Henry Cavill, all of the since it's received that sort of attention, is there a sense of almost one of the benefits to your mental health is this acceptance, is that it is being accepted by this large muscular man, or on the other side of that, do you also get a sense maybe for some people or for the same person but on another level sometimes almost you've lost your secret,
It definitely goes both ways.
Yeah, sure.
I think a while ago, I think a large proportion of the community wouldn't have really wanted to really get it out there. It's like, I love Warhammer, when you're meeting strangers.
Yeah.
I think...
But a little nod, feels fantastic.
Yeah.
You find somebody in the
exactly.
cult.
Yeah, exactly. I think with the move towards it becoming more mainstream, I think it is... It's interesting because it is becoming more popular. As I said before, we want it to grow.
Yeah.
But there's also part of me is holding on to my 90s nostalgia of I'm just going to go through this mail order catalogue and it's my own little thing. I think when the internet came in and social media and it's become far more everywhere, it's very different to what it was before. So I think there's probably some hesitance sometimes to when it is becoming much bigger. When Henry Cavill gets on board and says, I'm going to make a TV show about Warhammer, it's is this great?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So I think there is a bit of a nervousness about it, but generally, I think it's just moving forwards, which is good.
I think it comes from a place of passion and people are just...
It's a very passionate community.
Yeah,
it's a good way of describing it.
It's because it's been going a long time. It's going a really long time and it's changed, obviously it has, because it's modernised in the way they do sculpts and all these kind of things, but at its core, it's kind of the same thing still. And I think that's made people very protective over its sort of core facets. But in terms of, from my perspective, I think it's great that people like Henry Cavill and stuff are getting out, because at least I can explain to my nan what it is that I do. Yeah. So that's really helpful. But there's these kind of things of, I think that any kind of trepidation about things just come from a position of being very passionate about the thing you love in that sense and not wanting it to change, even though I don't think it would change for the worse in a way. I think it would just evolve like it has done and keep ultimately wanting to appease the people that love doing it.
I think for most people, you want to be validated for your time spent.
Yeah.
Whatever activity it is you're doing, you want people to understand and you want them to be able to relate in some way.
Yeah.
I'm sure when describing this to people who don't play it and things like that, you even if they don't understand the core mechanisms of the game, you want them to be able to understand what it is you get from it. So that they understand why you feel it's important to spend your time doing it. And I think that adoption outside of the core group of people who are interested in this anyway is presumably going to create opportunities to just feel understood, to feel seen.
I completely agree. I think it does allow you to, like you say, just, I don't know, not chat openly about it, that's the wrong phrase, but it does allow you to have people are like, oh, you do that Warhammer thing. It's like, yes, I do. And then you can explain, it sort of contextualizes it a bit for more people, I suppose, which is a good thing, I think. So I wanted to touch on as well, as I think, especially in terms of what you get out of the hobby, in a very my blunt understanding of how things work. Obviously, I know when I go, say, running or do exercise and stuff, it releases endorphins, and that's why I understand that I enjoy doing that thing. I guess, is there a similar kind of truth in doing that in the context of a hobby? Is there an immediate enjoyment thing that you're getting out of it, and why a lot of people initially jump to it, I suppose?
I like I said earlier, I don't think that you necessarily need to think about things in terms of how unique this activity is versus running or something like that. It's just time spent with other humans and you trying to achieve some outcome. You know, in terms of how your brain processes all of these things, you are just interacting with another human. You are looking at some things. You have a goal. You achieve the goal, or you don't.
Yeah.
And you learn whether you would like to do it again or not. You know, that's true of all human interaction. And the hormones released by your brain and neurotransmitters and all of that business are all just to facilitate all of those things. Do I think that there is some role for sort of these sharp physiological reactions that you might have whilst doing like physical activity? I'm pretty sure that, having looked downstairs at the various sets that you guys have got, I can imagine playing this game can get pretty heated and, in the right context can be very, very active. I'm sure there are shorter forms of the game that are less sprawling and things like that. That actually what your body is doing is probably exactly like running. It is a physically active thing. You're probably not necessarily running on the spot, but you're probably jumping up and down and being vocal and all of these kinds of things. So I think that there is a place for actually exactly the same mechanism for enjoyment from this. But as I said, I think that it's such a complex hobby. There's so many different facets to it. I don't think it's possible to tie down one specific mechanism by which a person would get enjoyment from it. And as I say, it's different. I'd imagine it's different for everybody at different times in their life. And in different scenarios and all of these kinds of things. But another thing I would say is also important, which is just sort of a bone that I have that I carry with me, is as a psychologist, I kind of feel a bit funny about invoking neuroscience when trying to talk about the things that humans do. Because I can feel the desire to do it, and I feel like it's something that I wanted to do when I was a younger psychologist. So I have a master's degree in cognitive neuroscience, and that made me feel really legit. There is a tendency to want to describe human activity in terms of what our brains are doing and why this makes those activities sensible or not. But I don't think, now that I'm more mature and I feel legit for other reasons, I feel like actually we don't need to invoke neuroscience to describe why things are enjoyable or not, or why we do things or don't do them. It can be, most things can be explained by much simpler sort of social mechanisms and cognitive mechanisms without going like, it's dopamine. It's for sure dopamine. That's the reason this feels great. But yeah.
I think I really love what you said, and you reiterated again there. I was going to touch on this earlier, but the idea of it not necessarily being doing A makes B happen. It's just like things you are doing as part of your life that you don't have to necessarily box them up into all these. This is why I do all these things. They are just facets of a life, and life in general that is very complex and has many things happening all at once. And everyone's going to have, like you say, very different things happening. So it might be reading a book is a good escapism, and that's what they kind of. But almost everyone does things that they want to do because they want to do them almost. And I quite like that. Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, of course, hopefully. Yeah, right. But I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, of not almost trying to, as you said earlier, focus on optimizing everything, because you don't need to, almost, to an extent.
I don't think I can, and I'm a very goal-driven person. I like to set objectives and try to achieve them, and all that kind of stuff. Like one of the things we enjoy doing is bouldering. I enjoy that because that's something where you say, I'm going to get to the top of the wall. And you try to get to the top of the wall and you fall off and then you try again. And for me, that is one activity that is just like, the goals are there and you try and achieve them. And it's, there's a social element to it. It's physical, all of these kinds of things. It's really enjoyable. But at the same time, that you don't need, I don't think a person needs to live a life that is constantly goal-based. I don't think that is necessarily helpful all of the time. I think balance and moderation is key to good mental health, in my humble opinion, as an expert.
That's great. I think something we did want to, I guess, just to sort of, not round out the episode, but to talk about briefly as well, is that there are many benefits to the hobby, and certainly we've found many benefits to being in the hobby. We find it helpful to maintain sort of good mental health for us. But something that we can't wait to talk about is if someone is finding that, I guess whatever it is they're doing, if they're just finding that they don't feel that, I don't know, the hobby is quite enough and they feel they need more support or would like to find out how to sort of look for any additional support they might need, what kind of first steps might look like, I guess, in helping themselves, I suppose, if that makes sense.
So I would say, first of all, that it's not a case of if, it's a case of when.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I think that we're at a point in terms of our understanding and acceptance of mental health and mental ill health, that this is something that all of us manage constantly and that we all experience ups and downs. And at this point, it is almost a cliche to state that, but I think that maintaining good mental health starts with recognizing that you won't feel healthy all the time, and that in many cases this will be for reasons you can't understand. And sometimes you can't understand it because you never tried to think about it, which I think is, particularly for those of us who are old, this comes from a place of never having had those conversations, not possessing the language to think about your internal self in that way. And for some people it comes from just, not necessarily, knowing, because the world is horribly complex and there are so many things that are influencing us at any given moment. So even if you do have the language and you are committed to trying to understand yourself, it's still really, really hard to understand the million things that could be influencing you at a given moment. But I think that all of us can take steps, first of all, while healthy. Yeah. That is the key to all of this, is that if right now you are feeling good, now is the time to do something about your mental health. And that is it. You don't want to be that person who, goes to the doctors because you're, really out of breath and really unhealthy, and the doctor says, why don't you quit smoking? Like that's, you should have done it earlier before it became a problem. And our mental health is the same. Like before you're out of breath and unable to walk, you need to take steps to protect your mental health. And that can take two forms, because you have to think about, like, what is mental health? And I think that because the history of psychology has mostly been determined by psychiatry, we often think about these things in very medical ways. And so it's really easy to make the mistake of thinking that mental health is just the absence of feeling bad. But it's not. It's much more than that. It's actually feeling good. And those are not. It's not one scale. It's not like good on one end and bad on the other. It's degrees of good and bad. These are two scales. And humans are so fantastically complex that you can feel actually good and bad at one time. I personally think that's the beauty of being human. That you can be in moments where you are feeling on some level like really fantastic about maybe possibilities in the future, but on the other side, dread, anxious. There's, oh my God, I've got this place I want to go to in my life, but oh my God, I've got to try and get there. And you feel both at the same time, and so recognizing that these are things that we are that complex, that at a given moment what you need to be doing is thinking not just about how can I reduce the likelihood that I'll be feeling bad, but also how can I increase the likelihood that I'm going to feel good. And it may be very different things that you need to do there. And one of the things that we're doing in our research at the moment is thinking of life and the management of mental health in terms of the things we can do more of and the things we can do less of. We have a really cool experiment for it, but I won't go into it. But essentially, what we don't think about is how you need, and in some cases you need to add some things, and in other cases you need to subtract some other things from your life. And that is like really, really obvious and intuitive. And of course, now that I've said it, you go, well, yeah, of course, there are some things you need to cut out and other things you need to do more of. But actually, that's not usually how humans think about life. What we usually think about is I need to do more. that actually I can sort of maintain all of the things that are wrong and bad for me or may not be helping me. And I'll just fill my time with more stuff that makes me feel good. But we only have so much time. One of my students referred to this as time famine. There is time famine.
We're in the great period of time famine.
Yeah, this is a great period of time famine.
Yeah.
Where everybody's really busy.
Yeah.
And there also is a culture of saying that you're really busy.
Yeah.
And that you need to be really busy. And so in that context, you have to think about, okay, I've only got a finite amount of time each day. What can I do less of? What isn't helping my mental health? And what could I be doing more of that is, first of all, something I know that is already existing in my life that could improve my mental health if I do more of it, or something that I haven't yet tried, something that isn't in my life. For most people, they think about, I'll do yoga, or mindfulness, these kinds of things that are the obvious things to add in.
Yeah.
But this can really be anything. And so I think the preservation of mental health really has to start with an analysis of what you are doing with your time.
Yeah.
Which things should you take from it that maybe could be better spent? If you free up some time, how you could allocate that time, if you think of things in sort of a businessy way, into things that you enjoy. And then an analysis of, what do I really enjoy already? What am I doing that is benefiting my mental health already? And for everybody, there will be something. And how can I do more of that? And for other people, it might be, how can I push myself to do some new things? And this might be something very obvious that's, psychology related. I need to read a CBT book or, cognitive behavioral therapy book. Maybe it's something like that. But actually, I'm not going to try and sell our wares. But, it might be something that is, much more sort of benign than that. Eat more fruit.
Yeah.
It's just really simple stuff that has a really big impact on our mental health.
Yeah.
But you don't think of it in that terms. But although I don't like to invoke neuroscience, let's not make the mistake of thinking that there's some sort of dualist sort of mind and body state here.
Yeah.
Everything you do influences your body because you have to use your body to do it and process it.
Yeah.
So therefore, you have to think about everything that influences your body will influence your mental health. Yeah. And it's not just like because you've got an annoying neighbour. It's not just that stuff that influences. It's literally everything.
Yeah.
And you can make a list, make a little table. Good stuff and bad stuff. Try and do more of the good stuff, less of the bad stuff. Simple.
Yeah.
But I will say also that for a lot of people, all of this will not be enough. That there are more complex needs and humans are not that simple. And for, I think that the first question is when? When do I need to do more? Do something beyond sort of life management? When is the time to do that? And so the best question you can ask yourself is, can I do everything I want to? And if you feel like there are things in your life that you really, really would like to be doing, but there's just a barrier, and maybe you don't know what the barrier is, but you just feel like I can't do that. Maybe it's something you want to do, or maybe it's something you used to do. If you're experiencing those barriers, then you can reach out and talk to somebody, whether it's a peer. Our friends are not always the best people to talk to. Sometimes it helps to speak to somebody anonymous, which for a community like this with such an online presence, perhaps this is actually a fantastic forum to speak about mental health, because I'm sure, I remember my time spending playing RPGs online and things like that. There's a lot of people but you don't really know. Yeah. You don't have to look these people in the eye every day. Yeah. Virtual art, perhaps, but that can be a fantastic space to open up to other people if you feel less comfortable looking somebody in the eye to talk about what's going on inside. And so I think take advantage of that space first of all. Talk to a friend, perhaps online, maybe in person. And if not, then reach out to services. In most countries, in the UK, there are services for self-referring yourself if you feel like you need some more help than you can find on your own. And similar systems exist in most developed countries, and it gets more complex and more sad and difficult in some other countries.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I mean, it's a cliche, isn't it? The first step is really just opening up to other people. But, you know, can I do everything I want to do? Are there barriers to me achieving and doing the things that I want in my life? However simple, you know, if it's something like walking my kid to school, I just can't bring myself to do it. I can't get out of the bed to do it. You know, if it's something as simple as that you find you can't do, but you would love to be able to do it, it's time to talk to somebody, for sure.
Yeah.
So to share an experience that I've had, or two of them actually, unfortunately both experiences, I hadn't been doing the maintenance that you were sort of alluding to.
Nobody does.
The ongoing maintenance.
Nobody does.
Yeah, it's a very useful conversation we're having right now.
Yeah.
I wish we had it a while ago. But both times it was sort of like too late, and I had to sort of go to reach out for.
And it is a hole. It's difficult to dig yourself out of it once you fell in.
Yeah, for sure. The first one was a few years ago now, and speaking about the barrier analogy, it got rather than go through the whole thing, the barrier appeared, manifested itself one day, and I just could not get off the train to go to work. I had a meeting to go to, a big meeting, and I suppose I'd sort of built up in my head that it's going to be very important, and who's going to be there, and what they're going to say. Are they going to be like, your shoes are weird? All those sorts of things. And
They probably were.
yeah, like, okay, yeah. The doors opened and the doors closed, and I was like, uh-oh, that's not good. And I couldn't go to work. I couldn't get off the train, couldn't get there. Went back home, had to make the call to be like, sorry, can't make the meeting. They were like, everything okay? And got back and spoke to my wife, Becca, and all of the things came out because had to have the conversation because I hadn't done up until that point. And fast forwarding a while through referrals and things like that, went through a period of therapy, and turns out I had lots of social anxiety issues. And without going into heaps and heaps of detail,
Please do.
Yeah, it was, session one.
Unzip me.
It was incredibly beneficial, and I've learned an awful lot about myself through doing that, and have realized that there isn't a cure for all of these things, but there are definitely tools and things to maintain oneself, which I sort of took with me from those sessions and I've used ever since. And I think, generally speaking, when I'm with people, I'm relatively animated, outgoing and whatnot. But in terms of like how that is within, that is kind of the complete opposite. So I think there wasn't any opportunities for me to change that and try and seek help from other people, and there wasn't many opportunities where people would sort of see any potential issues that I had. But going through and having those sessions was one of the best decisions I ever made. And I'm also having therapy at the moment as well. I'm a few sessions in. This is for a separate thing that I discovered and manifests itself. That's still ongoing, but was another example of how I just wasn't paying attention to what I probably needed in my life. Mm-hmm. So both times have sort of resulted in me going into these very, very unpleasant places in my life. But both times have allowed me to kind of seek help, not wanting to seek the help in any means at all. Like both separate pieces of therapy, sure. Going to those first sessions was very, very difficult and did not want to be there at all, although part of me knew that I really should be. So having to go into those unpleasant dips in my life, getting the correct help and being steered in certain ways has, again, been very, very transformational and has really helped me enhance parts of my life that needed it. So
you, not to sound like a therapist, but you can't minimize your own contribution to all of that as well. You know, that first moment when you're on the train and you can't jump out of the step off. I don't know. You don't need to jump off.
I did. Let's go.
You know, it's really easy to imagine that spiraling in terms of the thoughts that you're having. You know, all of a sudden you realize, you know, I don't want to get off this train. And the door closes and then you think, I have failed. Mm-hmm. You know, I am not the person that perhaps I would like to be. You know, and then there are all these, I'm sure, escalating thoughts in terms of, you know, guilt about other people, you know, and how you may have let them down and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And yet, whilst going through that spiral, as I'm sure is how it felt, you spoke to Becca about it, you know, mm-hmm. and it sounds like from the way they tell it, that sort of, you know, maybe didn't break the cycle, but at least sort of skewed it, you know, in a positive direction that allowed you to take some more positive steps. And mm-hmm. for many other people who you know, don't have that person or mm-hmm. don't feel comfortable sharing it with them because they don't want to seem weak to you know, people that they treasure. Mm. You know, the spiral keeps going downwards, you know, and it can feel worse and worse and worse. And so having the strength to make a very small change by opening up to somebody about it initially has set you off on a really positive trajectory. And then having a positive experience of therapy, which, you know, not everybody has.
Well, recently I had a very not good example.
Let's get into that.
Well, it was because when I was it's kind of around anxiety really, and the problem with anxiety is very difficult because you get anxiety, talk about anxiety, so that's quite a difficult stepping off point.
We call that anxiety sensitivity. That a whole facet of anxiety is anxiety about anxiety.
Yeah. It's very unfortunate.
Yeah, and so it's really easy in treatment to fall into the trap of treating the obvious manifestations of anxiety, you know, talking to other people, performing, you know, all this kind of stuff. And if you don't actually talk about the fact that you really don't enjoy feeling anxious, that actually what is most uncomfortable for you is, you know, the rush of adrenaline, the racing heart, you know, all of that kind of stuff. If you don't address any of that, it's like this latent factor that can come back.
Yeah. Well, so when I was sort of like exploring what I needed in the more recent one, I signed up to do it online because I was away in Cornwall and not at home, and I was like, well, I feel like I should probably do something quite soon because this doesn't feel good, and just the online experience didn't work for me at all. It wasn't good because there was an unfortunate internet-based connection issue. So when you're trying to open up to someone and they don't respond because it freezes, it's like, God, this is horrible. Now, that's not to say that online therapy is bad. It's just my experience being in my Airbnb with poor Wi-Fi probably wasn't the best decision. And I knew because I browsing the internet was slow. So that was my bad. But putting that to one side because it just wasn't working, when I eventually got to someone face to face, I sort of knew that was what I needed. And being able to talk to someone that I didn't know was completely anonymous that was there to listen to me speak, I just sort of melted into the chair and was able to be like, here's all my problems. And so I realized from that online for me didn't work, but finding someone to speak to in person was exactly what I needed.
And I think that for me is one of the most important realizations, because I think that when I talk to people who've had therapeutic experiences, sadly all too often you will talk to people who've had bad experiences. And maybe this is fair, it's just a normal human process, but there is an assumption that it would be the same whoever you spoke to, however you spoke to them. You know, that doing CBT, you know, is all that somebody would offer you. In many cases it will be. And that whoever offered it, in whatever context, in whatever time of your life, it would be the same experience. And it would be really nice. As a scientist, it would be lovely if the way that we did all of this was rigorous enough that all of the other variables that can influence how well therapy goes were just taken out of the equation. That it was always fantastic. But we have to accept the reality that a huge component of this, of course, is just a human relationship. Like you are talking to another person, and for many reasons, many of them will be obvious, many of them won't be. You might get on with that person or you might not. Mm-hmm. You know, there can be a fit, an understanding, whether it's spoken or unspoken. And so what makes me really sad is when somebody has had an experience and it doesn't go so well, and then there's an assumption that therapy is not for me. Like the therapy is not for me is like just kills me, because even if you go for the same therapy, even if you speak to one person and you have cognitive behavioral therapy, and then you go and speak to another person and they're effectively offering you the exact same treatment. If they're a different person, if you have a different relationship with them, if you have just other things going on in your head at that time, maybe you're more open, less closed, you know, all that kind of stuff, it can be an entirely different experience, you know, online versus in person, you know. For a lot of people, that online experience might be the fantastic gateway that they need, you know. They're not ready to sit in front of somebody, you know, they do want that distance, and so it works at that time. And so there's, unfortunately, there are so many ways that therapy can manifest. And not everybody has the time or the sort of mental capacity to try them all. You know, and very, very understandably. And as we know, you know, first experiences carry the most weight. You know. And so if you do have a bad experience in the first instance, it can be very bad if you're not willing to then try again with other people. But if anybody has had a bad experience, I would just urge them to just keep trying, because it is not all the same. Even if you meet another therapist and they go, yeah, well, I'm going to do mindfulness with you too, you know, and you think, God, I've already done mindfulness. It can be completely different, because it's a different human. You know.
I guess it's that thing, isn't it, of that you might just, because I think it's really interesting, the whole point you said at the start of this segment, of that sometimes just thinking about it more or doing something is almost the first step. It's like if you had, say you went to a dentist and you didn't have a good experience at the dentist, it doesn't mean that dental health isn't for you. Do you know what I mean? Like going to a different dentist, you might have a better experience, but it doesn't, even if you have a bad experience, it doesn't mean that actually what the end goal or the benefits of it might just be you need to find a different thing that works for you. Especially given that when you are talking about humans that are incredibly complex, there's so many more variables to then make that work for the person individually. And I think it's great what you said, to just almost sometimes just, it's easy to say, oh, I know I need to make the change, or I need to do this thing, or I could eat more fruit, or I could do these things. But it is always that hard thing to actually do them. In the same way, if you have a physical ailment, like my knee really hurts, say, you could just ignore it, and then your knee is damaged. And it is good and very beneficial to just go talk to someone about, like, my knee hurts, and then how can we help fix my knee?
I don't want to sound like Nostradamus or something, but the reality from where I'm sat and, you know, being knowledgeable of statistics and things like that, is that if you don't protect yourself from this stuff, it will come for you. You know, it happens to everybody. There's no escape from it. You know, life is difficult at different times. Sometimes it's pretty easy and you've got a handle on things and you can feel fantastic all the time. And then other times, sometimes for a reason, sometimes for apparently no reason, it will just get hard. And if you aren't taking the steps to protect yourself, then you're making yourself vulnerable to the, you know, the curvatures of experience. And you know, the more you can do to sort of prepare for those eventualities, you know, those inevitabilities, the better. And the good thing about, you know, the steps you can take to preserve your mental health, for most of it, there's no cost. It's not like what I'm proposing is take hard drugs to you know, preserve your mental health. It's like just do the basic stuff that you know already works for yourself. Just try and do a bit more of it. Do less of the other stuff that's not so good for you. Try some new things. And you know, what's the cost? You know, nothing. You know, there's no excuse.
Well,
I'm sure there are loads of excuses.
Honestly, thank you so much. That was fascinating. And genuinely, I think, even feel really helpful. I think of things even I'm thinking about, like, oh yeah, should
My knee does hurt.
My knee actually does hurt. I was thinking of it.
We've all gone like, oh yeah, my knee. But I think sometimes even just hopefully for everyone at home as well, just having people talk about this kind of thing, you are like, oh yeah, I probably should do that thing I've been putting off for ages, or I should talk to someone about this thing. And I hope that people do have the opportunity to be able to talk to people they need to, and their friends or online friends or whoever they need. I really hope that people can have that space. But I just want to thank you, Tom, for coming on and talking to us, because I've found a lot of stuff very interesting from that. I'm sure everyone at home did as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
A fantastically interesting conversation. We always hope you guys are doing okay and looking after yourselves and one another. But thank you very much for tuning into this episode. We've got loads of obviously more podcasts and episodes planned and guests and things like that. So thanks for tuning in. I have, as usual, been James Jordan, aka The Bard. I've been joined by Mr. Joe Pointing, as usual, and our very special guest, Mr. Tom Barry. Thank you very much, and we will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.